Hi, everyone. So in this video, I just wanted to essentially give a very broad, basic overview of SPSS, just for those of you who haven't ever used this program before, don't have any experience with it, which I'm coming in assuming that most of you haven't used this before. This is probably the first time you'll be using SPSS. So I'm not going to show you anything too substantial in terms of like performing specific analyses or anything like that here. This is really just supposed to be sort of when you open up the software for the first time, kind of what you're going to be seeing, because I know it can be kind of overwhelming. You see all the different functions, all these different buttons, and feel like you have no idea what you're doing. So just to kind of give you some general orientation as we start off the course here. So this shouldn't look too unfamiliar if you've used something like an Excel spreadsheet before or Google Sheets, anything like that, right? Same sort of grid setup that we have here. And usually what this is going to be for us, what the numbers here are reflecting always is going to be, so we have different rows which are reflecting different people, right? So we've measured some variables for some set of people. That's like doing any psychology study essentially is going to look like that. We're taking measurements from a sample of individuals. So the way that this is set up is, again, different rows will be different individuals that we've studied, so different people, basically. And then the columns are just going to be different variables, so things that we have measured for this group of people. And then each individual cell will just tell us, okay, here's what this particular person, right? So person 4 in this case, here's what they scored on this variable. So that's it at the most basic level. That's what you're always going to be saying, like, what are the numbers in these spreadsheets going to reflect? And that's always going to be the case, right? We're going to have some sample of people that we've studied and some set of variables that we've measured them on. And then most of the time, what we're trying to do in this statistics software is ask questions about both describing the variables, doing things to describe the distribution of the variables. And then later in the course, we'll start to get into questions about how are these different variables related to each other. And that'll be things like correlational research, experimental research, all about relationships between variables. But you can see at the bottom here, so they give you a couple different views. Overview, I don't really ever use. I'm not entirely sure what overview, what this window gives you. Most of the work that you're going to do here is going to be in either the data view, which is what I was just showing you here. And then if you go over to this other tab at the bottom, variable view. So we only have our one variable here, of course, but in the future, we'll be working with more complex data sets. We'll have more variables listed. But for now, this is just the most basic example, single variable. And then you basically just have in this row information about the variable. And some of this you can edit. So if you want to do things like change the name of the variable to reflect specifically what you measured. So let's say you have a measure of like self-esteem. Okay, I've measured my sample of people on self-esteem. You can name the variable self-esteem. And I think there's certain restrictions here. So you'll notice I put like underscore because I think they won't accept things like spaces. Yeah, so you'll get a little error there if you try to insert an illegal character like a space. So there's things like that you'll kind of get accustomed to as we move through the course. Here, the type of variable, almost always for us, this is going to be numeric. So we're going to be largely dealing with variables that take the form of numbers, essentially. And there are other types of variables that exist. There's not just numeric data. We can have things like, in lecture 1, I'll talk about categorical variables, for example, which is non-numeric data. We're just kind of like placing people into different categories. We will be working with some variables like that later in the semester. But you can click this and then see the different options here. Usually going to be most of the time either numeric or if it takes the form of text, whatever the variable is, it's going to be a string variable. So usually numeric or string. I don't think in all my years so far of doing research, I don't think I've used any of these other options. So mostly numeric, or if it's a non-numeric variable, basically it's going to be string. Here you see decimals if you want to see more or less decimal points, decimal places. Okay, you can go up to 2, things like that. Now you have, instead of just the integer, you can go out to 2 decimal places. So you have some options there. Other things we probably don't need to worry about for now. Like we'll probably end up doing things with this column later on, working with values. That'll be things like once we start looking at experiments and we're talking about like people in different groups or different conditions of some independent variable, we're going to be doing things in this column, in the values column, to kind of like assign people to those different conditions, things like that. But that's probably all you need for now in the variable view. And then beyond that, just final thing I can say is in terms of the different options up here, the vast majority of what we're going to be doing in this course is all going to be in this tab right here. So if you click Analyze, you're going to see a whole bunch of different options. I would say like 95%, if not more, of what we're going to be doing in the class is all going to be from this Analyze menu. So this is where you'll see in the first lecture, we're going to start here with things like we'll look at frequency tables here. You can get that option. I think in lecture 2, we'll start to move into descriptive statistics. And then later in the course, you'll see a bunch of other things, other types of analyses that we can get here as well. Once we start to get into comparing means or averages across different groups, we'll do lots of stuff with these t-test functions. We'll get into things like correlation and regression later. So most of what we'll do will be from Analyze. We'll do a little bit maybe in graphs also. I think you'll see some of that in the first class, the first set of slides as well. I'll have you come here to make a histogram and things like that. But yeah, those two tabs, Analyze and Graphs, is mostly what we're going to be doing. And then beyond that, I think there's other stuff that's going to be more kind of intuitive, just like working with any software. You go to File, that's where you can do things like save the data set. You can open, obviously you can always just click on the file, click on the .sav file, which is the SPSS file format, by the way. So you'll see some of those posted to Moodle already. Those .sav files is just essentially like an SPSS data set. It's just an SPSS spreadsheet. So you'll get something like this if you open that up. And I think that should do it for now. Everything else we can kind of deal with once it becomes relevant, once we get there later in the course. So there's your general, very broad intro to SPSS.